Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Integrative Therapist. So great to have you here with me today. Today, we're going to be talking about the 7-year itch. Maybe you've heard of it, maybe not. But stick around, as we're going to be looking at this from a frame of this isn't a problem to fix within the relationship. This is a normal phase that many long-term relationships often move through when life gets heavier and connection starts asking for something different from us. I'm your host, Julie, holistic therapist and storyteller, someone who believes that most relationship questions aren't about blame, but about understanding what's shifting and how to respond to it. Around here, we talk about relationships without panic, without blame, without pretending that love is supposed to feel easy all the time. You don't need to evaluate your relationship just by listening to this episode. This isn't about pressure, it's about perspective. And just a gentle reminder before we begin, this podcast is for education and self-support. It's not therapy or medical care. Take what lands, leave the rest, and reach out for support in your area if you need it. You don't have to do this alone. So before we begin, let's take a moment to arrive into the space and be present. If it feels comfortable, gently soften your body where you are. Unclench your jaw. Drop your shoulders. Let your breath slow just a little. I invite you to take a gentle breath in through your nose and a longer, unhurried exhale through your mouth. Let your body know there's no rush here, nothing to solve, nothing to decide, just simply being present in this moment. Perhaps begin to bring some awareness to the surface supporting you. The chair, the floor, the ground beneath you. And let yourself be held for a moment. As you breathe, bring to mind the idea of change. Not change as something urgent or threatening, but change as something natural, seasonal, human. If you're listening today with questions about love, connection, or where you are in a relationship, see if you can hold those questions gently, maybe with curiosity, as you don't need answers right now, just awareness. I invite you to take one more slow breath in and to exhale, letting it go. Reminding yourself quietly, I am allowed to be curious without rushing to conclusions. Gently bringing your awareness back to the space. When you're ready, settle in and let's begin. Let's talk about the so-called 7-year itch. You've probably heard it before, or maybe you haven't, so here we go. The phrase the 7-year itch didn't originate in psychology or neuroscience. It comes from popular culture. It showed up in the mid-1900s most famously as the title of a movie, and later got reinforced by early divorce statistics that showed a spike around the 5 to 10-year mark. But those numbers were never evidence of a biological expiration date on love. They reflected social patterns, life stress, and timing, when couples were often navigating career pressure, parenting, financial strain, and identity shifts all at once. It's not a rule your relationship is breaking, it's a story about change. And for a lot of people, just hearing the phrase can often spark anxiety, like there's some invisible countdown clock in long term love. So let's slow this down and get honest. The 7-year itch is not a biological deadline, it's not a curse, it's not a guarantee that something is wrong. But it is pointing to a very real transition that many relationships often go through. So, as we talk today about the so called 7-year itch, remember this isn't a rule or a timeline your relationship has to or may follow. It's a reference point, not a requirement. Some people may feel this shift earlier, some later, and for some, not at all. But what is actually happening is that early relationships are fueled by novelty, by uncertainty, by chemistry, by dopamine hits. There's excitement, there's anticipation, there's a sense of being chosen and discovered. But over time, that novelty naturally fades and predictability increases. Studies in attachment research show that romantic love often begins with novelty driven bonding, but long term connection relies more heavily on attachment systems tied to safety, reassurance, and regulation. So, what do we actually mean by attachment? Attachment isn't a personality trait or a label. It's a way that we learn to stay connected to the people who matter most to us, especially under stress. The concept comes from early work by John Bowlby, who observed that humans are wired to seek closeness, comfort, and reassurance from trusted others when life feels uncertain or overwhelming. So, in adult relationships, this attachment shows up in very ordinary ways. It's how we reach for each other when we're tired. It's how we respond when there's distance or conflict. It's how we ask for reassurance or protect ourselves when it feels unavailable. In other words, as relationships move out of the honeymoon phase, attachment needs become clearer. Not because something is wrong, but because real life has entered the picture. In the early stages of a relationship, connection is often carried by chemistry and excitement. Differences feel smaller, and repair happens without us even noticing. Our attention naturally moves towards each other. But over time, predictability grows. Life adds weight and stress accumulates. The relationship begins to ask different questions of us. Not, are we excited? But more, can we stay connected when things are harder? Can we feel understood when we're tired? Or can this relationship hold who we are becoming now? This is a point where love stops being automatic and starts asking for something more intentional. Around the 5-10 year mark, many couples are also carrying more life, more responsibility, more stress, more roles, certainly more fatigue. There's careers, parenting, caregiving, financial pressure, accumulated emotional weight. And this is often the phase where love isn't just happening inside the relationship anymore. It's happening alongside everything else that we're carrying. And here's the part we rarely say out loud. When people are under chronic stress, they simply have less capacity for attunement. And attunement is what allows us to sense each other, to pick up on tone, to notice shifts in mood, to respond with care instead of defensiveness. It's what makes someone feel seen, even in those small moments. So when stress is chronic, that capacity doesn't disappear. It just becomes harder for us to access. Research on stress and close relationships consistently shows that ongoing life stress reduces emotional availability, patience, and responsiveness between partners. Studies in relationship psychology, including work by the amazing John Gottman, have found that when couples are overwhelmed, even strong relationships experience drops in connection, empathy, and effective repair. Not because partners don't care, but because stress narrows our attention and it drains our emotional resources. Couples often describe this phase as We don't connect like we used to. We feel so distant from one another. Everything feels heavier and unmanageable. And those descriptions are incredibly accurate. What often gets missed, though, is that this distance doesn't always mean disinterest. It often means depletion. Psychological research on emotional regulation and attachment shows that under high stress, people tend to rely more heavily on their default attachment strategies. Some reach for reassurance, others pull back to preserve energy. Neither response is about wanting less connection. It's about having less energy to offer to each other. So when connection feels harder during this phase, it's not necessarily a love problem. It's often a capacity problem. And when we name that, something important can shift. Instead of asking, what's wrong with us? We can start to ask, what are we holding that hasn't had space yet? How have our responsibilities changed us lately? And what kind of closeness feels possible right now, not ideal? That reframing alone can sometimes soften a lot of the blame. The 7-year itch isn't about boredom, it's about change. It's the moment when connection stops happening on autopilot and starts asking for something more conscious. Many relationships don't fall apart here. They slow down, they wait, because this is a point where the questions start changing. They start moving from how do we connect to how do we stay connected in the middle of real life. And this shift can feel uncomfortable, not because something is wrong, but because something deeper is being asked for here. The itch isn't usually about wanting someone else. It's about wanting movement, wanting aliveness, wanting relief, wanting to feel chosen again, wanting something to shift, anything. When connection starts to feel stagnant or strained, people often assume something is wrong with the relationship. But what's actually happening is more subtle and more human. Research on long-term relationships and desire show that feelings of restlessness or dissatisfaction often emerge not because love is gone, but because a relationship has become overloaded with responsibility, predictability, and pressure. In other words, the itch isn't about absence of love. It's about a loss of space, energy, or vitality. When connection feels constrained, the system looks for movement. Sometimes that movement shows up quietly. Sometimes it shows up sideways. It might look like pulling away emotionally, increased irritability or tension, fantasizing about other lives, other versions of self, or other possibilities, questioning the relationship, or wondering if love has somehow run out. These responses can often feel confusing or even frightening, especially when care and commitment are still very much present. Research on attachment and stress suggests that under strain, people don't lose love, they lose access to ease and safety. When emotional or relational needs go unmet for too long, the system searches for relief, not replacement. So often, what's actually missing isn't love, it's regulation, the ability to settle together again. It's repair, the willingness to address what's been accumulating. And it's renegotiation, updating the relationship to fit the season of life that you're currently in, not the one that you started in. When we start to understand some of that, the itch stops feeling like a threat and starts feeling more like information. You know, I want to pause here and name something that often lives underneath this itch too, because it's part of the story and we just don't talk enough about it. When I look back at my own relationship, it feels like I've been so many different people of myself over the years, different seasons, different priorities, different ways of understanding myself, the world, and others. And sometimes it feels like I've changed more than my partner, or maybe I've just changed out loud more than he has. I mean, he can feel like the same steady person that he's always been throughout our relationship, while I feel like I've lived several different versions of myself along the way. And that difference can bring both tenderness and tension. What we don't always expect is that growth doesn't happen all at the same pace or in the same direction for two people in a long term relationship. One person might feel like they've evolved through many internal shifts, while the other, maybe they feel more consistent and more rooted. That doesn't mean that one person is growing and the other isn't. It just usually means that growth is happening differently. But when those differences aren't named, they can quietly fuel restlessness, sometimes even resentment. Sometimes the itch isn't about wanting someone else, it's about wanting to be seen in who you become. And when you feel like you've changed, but your partner is still relating to an older version of you, that can feel disorienting. Not because anyone is doing something wrong, but because being seen and known is such a core part of feeling connected in a relationship. When who you are on the inside no longer matches how you've been being met on the outside, there's a quiet disconnect, and you might feel misunderstood, unrecognized, or like you're having to translate yourself in a relationship where you once felt fluent. That gap can create confusion, not about love, but about belonging. Changing doesn't mean outgrowing your relationship. It often means a relationship is being asked to meet you where you are now. And that's not the end of something. That's the start of a new way of relating. Like everything, long-term relationships move in cycles, not straight lines. There are phases of closeness when connection feels easy and natural, and there are phases of distance when life pulls attention elsewhere and togetherness feels harder to access. There are phases of renegotiation when what once worked no longer fits and new agreements need space to emerge. And there are phases of deepening when intimacy becomes quieter, steadier, less fueled by novelty, and more grounded in knowing. The stage often asks different questions. Not, are we still in love? But, can we stay in a relationship while we're changing? Can we repair instead of retreat? Can we talk about our needs without blame? And can we update how we care for each other now, not just rely on who we used to be? These questions don't signal failure. They signal growth. This isn't the relationship breaking down. It's a relationship being asked to mature and evolve. And maturation doesn't mean losing love. It means learning how to carry it differently. So, a couple different ways that we can work through these phases, not rush through it, but meet it with more care and attention. Much of this comes from decades of research from John Gottman, who found that long term relationship health isn't built on grand gestures, but on small, consistent moments of connection and repair. And first is to turn toward, not away from your partner, even in the smallest ways. One of the strongest predictors of relationship stability is something very simple. Do we turn toward each other when connection is offered, or do we turn away? A comment, a sigh, a question, a glance. In high load seasons, we miss those moments more often, not because we don't care, but because we're tired. So instead of trying to fix a whole relationship, perhaps asking, what are we missing in each other in those small moments? Where could we show up just a little bit more intentionally for each other? What's one small moment today where we could choose each other? And where could we pause long enough to connect? Maybe that might look like putting your phone down when your partner starts talking, even for a minute, pausing the show instead of half listening, responding with curiosity instead of distraction, or even reflecting back one thing you heard instead of offering a solution. This looks like responding to each other before responding to the world. That's often where connection is rebuilt, not in grand conversations, but in those small moments where someone says, you have my attention before the rest of the world does. Next is talking about our needs without blame. So, how we talk about our needs matters more than what we're asking for, because the way that a message is delivered often determines whether it feels like an invitation or a form of criticism. The same need can create closeness or conflict, depending on how it's spoken and relayed. Needs expressed as criticism can often create defensiveness. Needs expressed as vulnerability may invite closeness. That might look like, instead of saying you never or you always, maybe that would sound like, I've been feeling disconnected lately and I miss you. It feels like life is really loud and I don't want us to get lost in it. Can we just slow down for 1 minute? I feel like we've been moving past each other lately. The repair starts at the first sentence. The opening sets a tone for everything that follows afterwards. Next is normalizing repair in relationships, not perfection. Healthy relationships are not conflict-free. They're repair-rich. Gottman found that successful couples maintain connection, not by getting it right all the time, but by repairing quickly enough that resentment doesn't get a foothold. Repair keeps small ruptures from turning into long-term distance. It's not about perfection. It's about responsiveness. Repair might be, I'm sorry that came out wrong. Can we try that again? I'm feeling overwhelmed, not angry. I do want to stay connected even though this is hard for us right now. Repair says we matter more in this moment. And in this phase, repair is often more important than the resolution. The next is to update the relationship, not the person. This is a big one. So instead of asking what's wrong with us, why aren't we like we used to be, try asking, what does this phase of our life need right now from our relationship? What agreements need updating? What expectations are outdated? People change, life changes. What once worked doesn't always keep working. And relationships that last aren't the ones that stay frozen in time. They're the ones that get updated as people grow, stretch, and shift. Lasting love isn't built on preserving the past. It's built on staying responsive to the present. And finally, making room for the positive on purpose. Gottman's research also shows that stable relationships maintain a higher ratio of positive to negative interactions, especially during periods of stress. Not because life is easier, but because positivity is intentionally protected, and that is an important distinction here. This doesn't mean couples are pretending things are fine by any means. It doesn't mean avoiding hard conversations or forcing gratitude when things feel heavy. It means that even during conflict, fatigue, or pressure, there is still enough warmth, respect, and goodwill in the system to keep that relationship feeling safe. Small moments of appreciation, gentle humor, affection, kindness in tone, these moments act like a buffer. They don't erase stress, but they keep stress from defining the entire relationship. When positivity is protected, conflict feels less threatening. Missteps don't feel like proving something is broken, and repair feels possible instead of overwhelming. So it isn't about being happy all the time. That's just not realistic. It's about making sure the relationship isn't only a place where problems live, even in hard seasons. A simple practice to leave with you. Once a day, name one thing you appreciated about your partner and tell them that, even on the hard days, especially on the hard days. These aren't instructions for getting it right, they're supports for staying connected. This phase isn't asking for more from you, it's asking for something different from you. And even one small shift can help the relationship breathe again. If you're in a long-term relationship that feels different than it used to, that doesn't mean you chose wrong. It often means the relationship has entered a phase where honesty matters more than chemistry, where care matters more than intensity, and where showing up gently matters more than getting it right. This is a phase where love asks to be practiced, not proven, where connection is built less on momentum and more on intention. The 7-year itch isn't a warning sign, it isn't a deadline, and it certainly isn't a diagnosis. It's information. It's an invitation to slow down, to listen more closely to yourself and to each other, to tend to what's been carrying away quietly in the background, and to grow something deeper than novelty, something steadier than excitement, and something that can actually hold the life you're living in now. And whether you're partnered, single, questioning, or somewhere in between, remember this. Relationships don't fail because they change. They struggle when change goes unnamed, unspoken, and unsupported. So, if something in this conversation stirred reflection, tenderness, or curiosity, you don't need to rush to conclusions. You don't need to decide anything today. Sometimes the most meaningful shift is simply noticing what season you're in and offering it a little more attention and care. Coming up next, we're unpacking love languages, how they become a common language for connection today, how to work with them without letting them define or constrain your relationships. Thank you so much for joining me today. Please take care of yourself and each other. Till next time.